Sorry, those online just unmuted you. If you're online, please use the Q&A to ask questions and we will make sure you get your question asked. Students, sign in if you're registered for class. Please register for lightning talks. Today is the last day. And after seminar, you can follow Julia and Chia back to rate for lunch with the speaker if you're interested. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Bill Lavely from Sociology to introduce our speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to introduce Chia Liu. Chia is Associate Lecturer of Geography and Sustainable Development at the University of St. Andrews in lovely Scotland. Chia spent a few years working at the US Census Bureau before receiving her PhD from the Center for Demographic Studies at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. She has been a postdoc at the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research in Rostock. And this year, she is an Understanding Society Fellow funded by the Economic and Social Research Council of the UK. She is a social demographer who focuses on topics such as living arrangements, gender division of labor, I should say, family structure, child outcomes, and transnational families. Her publications include work on refugees and asylum seekers in Europe and on intimate partner violence. Her topic today is growing up in the UK, child development in a complex system. So please welcome Dr. Chia Liu.
Thank you so much for coming, especially on this beautiful day. And thank you, Bill, for the introduction. Okay, we're good. So today I'll be talking to you about a project I just got funded for called Ethnic Diversity in Digital Experiences Among Youth. I think I was trying to go for an acronym there. So it's Project EDDI. It's on adolescent digital device usage in the UK. And this project started September of this year. So just to let you know, if you're not seeing anything super amazing, the project team is me, and it started 2 months ago. So I will tell you a little bit about myself, my career trajectory, and of course, I hope some of you will come to have lunch with me. If you're interested in any of the things I've done, please do come talk to me. And I'll give a little bit of background on this research, talk about data methods, results, summarize some of the findings I have so far, and then also propose some future steps, which I would love to have your feedback on. So I thought I would just introduce myself with a map. So these are, yeah, colors come out okay, right? So these are the places I've lived and visited. So I was born in Taiwan, and I moved to New Jersey when I was little. I went to college at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and after which time I went to UC Irvine and I got my master's from the Demographic and Social Analysis program, and I became a demographer at the Census Bureau after that. And after a few years at the Census Bureau, and I want to tell everyone it's a great job, it's well paid, but I felt like I wanted to do something with a bit more variety, let's say. So I went to Europe, and I went to Barcelona specifically to do my PhD at the Center for Demographic Studies at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And then I got my first postdoc at Rostock at Max Planck Institute, after which I did a second postdoc at the University of St. Andrews, and I am in my position there now. So to tell you a little bit about the University of St. Andrews, we are the third oldest university in the English-speaking world, just after Oxford and Cambridge. So it has a lot of traditions that the students really, really love, and they preserve them, and they continue to observe them even today. So you see students there with the torches, with the red gown. So they're not graduation gowns. Not all, but a lot of undergrads buy one. So it tells people that you're our student, and then they wear them when they go to church. They wear them when they have certain ceremonies. And actually, it started from the tradition of they were forced to wear them many hundreds of years ago. So the local pubs wouldn't serve. So they still wear these as a symbol of pride. And you could see the cathedral, sort of the cathedral ruin on the top corner here. So that's where our office is, right around here in this very beautiful ancient cathedral that's in ruins now. So St. Andrews is a very important place for a lot of Christians. There's a very deep-seated tradition in theology at the University of St. Andrews. And up here you could see that I on the top left, left here, where I participated in a debate. So debates are also very much a tradition at the University of St. Andrews. And in this debate, I went against a professor from the University of Edinburgh on whether or not marriage as an institution should exist. And these are my colleagues and PhD students that came to support me to vote for me. And you can see the northern lights, maybe not so much there in the bottom corner there, but we see them several times in a year. So it's a very beautiful place to be. So within the University of St. Andrews, I'm in the School of Geography and Sustainable Development. We have quite a few demographers there, actually. So usually universities don't have a standalone demography department. So usually we're embedded either in sociology or geography. So that's where we are. I'm also in the Population and Health Research Group, which right now holds many large European projects, such as the Migrant Life Project, which I was a postdoc for, the Center for Population Change, which is a research center with Southampton, I believe, and maybe some other centers as well. Connecting Generations is also a very big project that we're a part of. Child Lives is a project on how parental separations affect children from a longitudinal perspective, which is a project held by a colleague of mine. And we're also home to a survey called EVENS, Evidence for Equality National Survey. So for my personal research profile is more on family demographics and also relationships. So I guess the relationship aspect of that is a bit more sociological. It's the kind of papers I've written are quite broad, so it's hard to say what's your, subject exactly. So I work with spousal, parent-child, also parent-adult-child relationship in the face of new challenges such as migration or demographic and social changes. So these are some of my publications. So you can see that there's, Latin America, there's Germany. So geography-wise, not really confined to a certain place, but I'm interested in a very wide range of topics. And today I will be talking to you about the Understanding Society project, which I got funded for. This is just on their website. And it's a one-year fellowship, so the project should last about 1 year. At least they give you the money for a teaching buyout for 1 year. And if you want to work on that beyond the 1 year, then that's on your own time. So a little bit on the project. So what motivated this project? We know that universal digital device usage among children are pretty much universal now, right? So if we look at this a chart from the Office of Communication in the UK, you see that even kids as young as 5 to 7, most of them use a tablet, and usually to watch shows, to play games. Some of them already own a smartphone, which I felt is maybe that sounds a bit young, but about 1 in 5 of them own a smartphone already. And a good portion of them are on social media independently already. And about 40% of them play games online. And a lot of times they interact with people maybe outside of their normal sort of real life social circle.
Was this a parent reporting behavior or was it an observed, somebody observing?
I have to check the report again, but it's a report written by Office of Communication. So I'm guessing they surveyed the parents. Yeah. So we know there's a variation in usage, such as social media, a lot of times gaming, watching videos. And there's a spike of interest, for rising interest in how that links to well-being. For people of all ages, not necessarily just children, but also for children, also development. And it's garnered a lot of public and also scholarly attention. So the big question is obviously, is social media usage harmful for kids, right? And a lot of us use social media for a range of reasons. It helps us find jobs, find partners, and we know it could be very useful. And there's papers on how it's a platform for social connection during times like COVID. And earlier I was talking to Professor Emiko Tajima, is it Tajima? And she also mentioned that something like social media could be useful for, let's say, vulnerable populations for them to find each other, right? So we're not going to negate the use of a tool completely, right? So that there are definitely benefits to using social media. But when we talk about child development, there's some scholars that are concerned about children's developmental trajectory, given that they start sort of consuming a lot of it really young. So there's scholars that said it's bad, especially at younger ages, for social emotional competence. And this seems quite intuitive, right? So instead of engaging in conversations with people, they can retreat to looking at their tablet during dinner time or when their parents are engaging in conversations with other people. And they also say it's quite bad, especially for girls that get a smartphone very early on, because they get a lot of contents that makes them feel, they have comparisons to maybe realities that's not really achievable. And there's also the issue of online bullying. And a lot of research also shows that it's null or it's quite complicated. So there's research that shows the relationship is quadratic. If you don't use it at all, or if you use too much of it, it's bad for you. But if you use a little with moderation, it's fine. There's no bad consequences from that. And there's also the gold standard, of course, is to look at sort of changes across time, right? So the effect when you look at within person changes is actually not a lot. So maybe it's a selection of people or kids that get a lot of screen time, right? That there are other things in their lives that's affecting their development rather than the smartphone itself. And there's also research that shows that it is bad, but it's only a tiny bit bad. So the effect size is so small, we don't need to do anything or panic about it. Okay, so how does ethnic minority comes into this conversation? So we know ethnic minorities in the UK, so in the US it's a similar story, but there's variations across geography, but they tend to be in different social economic status groups. So we know that in the UK, groups like Indians, they fare better economically and also in terms of academic outcomes, they're better than groups like Pakistanis and Bangladeshis. And also family structures could be quite different. So some families are a bit more conservative, have sort of more the two-parent family norms, such as South Asians, and others are more diverse, like Caribbeans. Cohabitation rate is much higher than some of the other groups. And then also divorce and subsequent partnership is a bit more diverse than, say, South Asian families. And we know parenting styles is different across ethnic groups. There's quite a bit of literature on that in the US, a little bit less so in the UK. And usually they point to less positive and more strict parenting among minorities. So high demand and low warmth. So all these things would plausibly affect a child's outcome, right? So it's not necessarily that they are letting their child watch more iPad or not, but rather all these other variables that could show, that could be influential in the differences between groups. So if you position minorities in the UK with other higher income countries, so these are OECD countries, we're saying that like the US, I know it's hard to see, the US is somewhere here, right? So like the US, in the UK, actually ethnic minorities do quite well in school, especially after you control for socioeconomic factors. We see that a lot of times they perform better than non-immigrant individuals. So the line there, 0, is sort of the comparison group, the non-migrant individuals in each country. So in the UK, they do quite a bit better than if you say you have, sorry, shouldn't walk away. Then if you compare to countries more on the right end, such as Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. So we know there's probably a selection process going on, right? So in the case of Sweden, for example, there's quite a lot of refugee migrations, people that migrated when they were not ready to migrate, for example, or they didn't really migrate out of the wish to stay for schooling or for job opportunities, et cetera. So the composition of migrants are quite different across Europe. And in the UK, they are a little bit more similar to the US in terms of having some more highly not highly qualified, but sort of higher SES parents or ones that have climbed up since migration. So if we look at ethnic parenting in context, once again, the literature is rather thin in the UK. In the US, scholars such as Garcia Cole has done quite a lot of work on parenting literature. And she argues that parenting literature, to which that a lot of people find as sort of evidence-based parenting, is often centered on white American middle-class families. And we know that there is, for parents of minority groups, they have to face a lot of times social stratification. So their group's social location in the stratification has real consequences in terms of their children's opportunities, resources, and rewards, and they might sort of parent as a reaction to that and as a response to where they see their children or the kind of obstacles their children might come up against when they reach a certain age. But the paradox, which is kind of like the healthy immigrant paradox, is that the more acculturated kids become in the US, in the context of the US, the worse their developmental outcomes. So this is looking at outcomes such as teen pregnancy, looking at outcomes such as incarceration, et cetera, or school, finishing school. So there's a lot of room in this literature, but that has not really been as rich as some of other immigrant literature. So what's the relationship between parenting style and children's digital device usage? Has anybody seen the show Adolescence? It's so this show is garnered a lot of public discussion on children's outcome, and you know, basically the parents feel like they're good parents and they've been keeping their children safe at home, but they didn't know that giving them a digital device might be introducing them to a world where the parents really have little information on. And we know that qualitative work has shown that parents are generally guided by their already established styles of parenting when it comes to digital device, right? So if they're kind of permissive, they tend to be a bit more permissive with giving a lot of device usage. If they're quite controlling or higher demand, they exert more control in that area. But regardless of people's intention, time, space, energy, finance, values, and culture play a really important role in how they raise their children. So Baumrin's 1991 publication on 4 styles of parenting broadly defined sort of 4 styles of parenting. Authoritarian, which is more low warmth, high control. Authoritative, high control, but high warmth. Permissive, low demand, but high warmth. And laissez-faire, which is you're not doing much, right? Laissez-faire parenting. So this has been reframed by a scholar through parental internet style as well. But it has not really been updated that much since. And especially we know things like internet usage has changed a lot in the past 5-10 years, not just in the magnitude, but also in terms of algorithms that suggest videos to your children that, you know, there's a way in which that they're accessing content without parents really, you know, intentionally giving them that content. Okay, so if we could assume that there might be inequalities in children across ethnic groups, there's so many things that could affect that inequalities and that outcome, right? So today we're going to focus more on social emotional development or social emotional health. I'll explain that a bit more later. And we know ethnic minorities tend to have different parenting style. They might be in different geographies for concentration or neighborhood, let's say by neighborhood deprivation level. They could have different socioeconomic status, and they have different family structures. So today we're going to focus more on parenting style and socio-emotional development in relation to digital device usage. So because I've only began this project about 2 months ago, I started out by asking naive questions, right? So this is sort of the data exploration stage. We don't know what's going to happen yet. We're going to let data sort of guide us a little bit, right? So we want to know whether or not, first of all, ethnic groups really do parent differently, at least in this data set, given this framework. And second, whether or not the kids actually do use digital device differently. You might see that they're very similar because there's no ethnic differences. So we need to know whether or not the difference exists in the first place. And third, whether or not we actually see that ethnic minorities are experiencing this inequality in let's say, socio-emotional development. Okay, so Understanding Society data set is also called the UK Household Panel Study, the UKHLS, I think, longitudinal study, which runs from 2009 to the present day. Before, it was the British Household Panel Study, but you can link them together. So, and booth samples are collected for ethnic minorities, like many household panel studies, to enable researchers to ask interesting questions about ethnic minorities as well. So it contains the main questionnaire that's answered by usually the parents of the household, and then there's a youth questionnaire that is answered by anybody who's 10 to 15 years old within the household, and they are repeatedly measured given this sort of age frame. So the major groups in Understanding Society corresponds with major groups of ethnic minorities in the UK. So Indians, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Africans, and Caribbeans. And they're not necessarily migrants. So we're just looking, well, maybe they were migrants at some point, but they're not the children themselves. Most of them were born in the UK. The key covariates we're going to look at is strengths and difficulties, and these are reported by youths. I'll go into how they measure strengths and difficulties in a minute. Parenting style is reported by the parents themselves. And then I was going to talk a little bit more about neighborhood deprivation, measured by something called the index of multiple deprivation. One of the geographers within our school talked me out of it and said, if you're not going to get into geography, just say it's a covariate. You're not going to talk too much about it. So I won't go too much into detail with that. So the strengths and difficulties are measured. It's an instrument created by, I think, Goodman, to measure internal and external problems in children. So they answer questions. So they're basically separating internal problems, external problems. Internal problems are more like emotional problems and peer problems. External are conduct and hyperactivity. So questions are answered by the children are how often do you feel these ways, or how much this is an issue for you? Emotional problems are like, I worry a lot. I am often unhappy. I feel tearful. I have many fears, right? Some sort of anxiety. Peer problems, I only get along with people who are like adults, or other people bully me. I can't seem to have at least one friend in school. So these are peer problems. External problems are things like I'm often accused of lying and cheating. I'm actually surprised that anybody would just in terms of social desirability would say often for that. Or get very angry and tend to lose my temper. Hyperactivity is like I get really easily distracted. I find it really difficult to concentrate. I'm constantly fidgeting or squirming. And the parenting styles dimensions questionnaires are answered by the parents of the youths. So basically, in this questionnaire, only 3 out of the 4 dimensions are measured. So laissez-faire parenting is not included here. So these 3 are sort of factors of that try to capture authoritative parenting is connection. So there's warmth and support. I often ask my kids how their day was, or if I tell them no, I tell them why, right? So these are and regulation, reasoning and induction. I guess the telling why is more this part. And also autonomy granting, that we're going to decide together whether or not we're going to do something. Authoritarian tends to be more harsh parenting, right? So this is often associated with sort of ethnic minority parenting quite often. So sometimes physical coercion, sometimes corporal punishment, verbal hostility, just harsh criticisms, like I scold and criticize to make my child improve. And non-reasoning, more punitive, like the more because I said so type of parenting. Permissive is more sort of warm, but low demand and low control. So they answer questions like, I find it difficult to discipline my child. If my child kicks up a fuss, I give up. So this is usually seen as more indulgent parenting. So both authoritarian parenting and permissive parenting are actually shown to be linked to worse mental health for children. I think permissive parenting especially is linked to lower academic outcomes. Okay, so I'll show some just descriptive results on what I have so far from the Understanding Society. So if you're not used to seeing this type of plots, this is called a ridge plot. It's just a kind of cute bar chart, right? So imagine the little mountains are made by tiny little bars. So here on the x-axis, we have difficulty scores. So from 0 is the child experiences no difficulties at all. And 40 is they experience everything. They have anxiety, they have no friends, so that's the most severe situation. So so every curve, every little mountain is 100% of the children in that ethnic category, right? So all the way up top, we have white children here. And the lines separate the values by quartile. So this is just a distribution plot. So we can see the median score of white kids is higher than South Asian kids and especially higher than African kids. So this is consistent with what we know from US literature, that ethnic minority kids actually are a little bit, show a little bit more resilience in terms of mental health. Okay, so the next thing we want to know, if two groups actually parent differently. So we just do an analysis of variance and do a post hoc pairwise comparison. So if you see a plus sign there, it means that group is higher than whites. A minus sign is that ethnic group is lower than whites, and a missing sign means that it's not statistically significant. So we know that Indians are less permissive than whites, but they are more authoritarian than whites. We know Pakistani and Bangladeshi are more authoritarian than whites, but they're less authoritative than whites. African and whites, they differ on all three dimensions. They're less permissive, they're more authoritarian, and they're also more authoritative. And then the other naive question is, do they actually differ in social media usage? So I just did a distribution and ran a chi-square test, and we see that whites and Africans have slightly different, so slightly higher sort of 4+ hours usage. So this is per weekday. So think about the child is in school most of the day, and most of them use less than an hour per day. So actually the categories was finer than this. It was like not at all, less than, nobody's in the not at all. Well, nobody, there's very few people in the not at all category. So it's not really meaningful to keep it. We just group it with a less than 1 hour, and then 1 to 3 hours. And the top categories is 4 to 7 hours and 7+. So 7+, that's quite extreme. That's also quite few people. So we put them together. Okay. So we look at parenting styles by sort of the gender of the parents here. These are just mean and standard deviations. We can see that white parents are quite, have more distinct sort of gender differences in authoritativeness. So white mother are quite authoritative, much like the other groups, white fathers are not very authoritative, right? They're quite low there. And we see that kind of understandably that the white fathers, because of the authoritativeness, we see that they're quite a bit more permissive, right? And then the white mothers are more similar to the other group. So it's really the white fathers that are bringing their average down. So we see in the other groups, the male and female parents are a bit more similar. So here is the IMD. So index of multiple deprivation. One, the darkest circle is the most deprived 20% of households. And these are calculated by census tracts, right? So there they call them lower super output area. That just means census tract, basically. And then the lightest color, IMD 5, that is the least deprived. So they live in the most affluent area. So we can see that permissiveness, especially amongst whites, is quite clear that the people living in the most deprived areas are statistically more permissive than white parents living in more affluent areas. And in the other groups, we see less sort of clear patterns. And we also see, it's a very different thing, but they also tend to be more authoritarian, the whites living in the most deprived areas than the other groups. See less difference amongst the other groups, but I didn't talk about sample size. Yes.
Can you just quickly explain that?
The scores, yeah. So that is the parenting style dimension questionnaire, so that they calculated from the questionnaire. So if you say that, I often tell my kid that to talk about their problems, then you get like a 5 or something on that. If you say I never do that, then you get a 0. So that's kind of additive. So even if you compare the scores, right? Like most people don't think they're permissive. So permissive scores is just kind of a lower range. And authoritative, which kind of is generally the more desirable type of parenting, let's say, linked to better outcomes, the score tends to be a bit higher. Okay, sorry for being unclear. But anyway, so the sample size are not very large for the ethnic groups. That's why there's some grouping. And I had some disagreement with, well, not disagreement, but I got some feedback from colleagues like Blacks and Caribbeans are not really that, like Africans, Caribbeans are different, and Pakistan, Bangladeshi. I think most people agree that they can be more together, but Indians tend to do a bit better socially, socioeconomically speaking, so they are separated. So there's some sample size constraint here. Okay. All right, so this is the same thing you saw earlier. We're just this is just a crosstab, right? So we're doing a cross tabulation of distribution of social media usage on a weekday by different dimensions of the strength and difficulty scores. So if you look at the lightest color up top, that's adolescents using social media for less than 1 hour per day. And the middle one is 1 to 3 hours, and the bottom one is 4+ hours. It's quite evident from, I would say, from emotional and hyperactivity that you see sort of the mountain shifts to the center, or kind of the tip melts, right? So if you look at emotional problems, most kids don't have emotional problems. They're leaning towards a 0, right? But kids that use social media a lot, you see the distribution shifts towards the 10, right? So you kind of see the difficulty increases, not increases, and I want to say is correlated with sort of more issues. And hyperactivity is also, most are not hyperactive if they use less than 1 hour per day, but you see the peak moves to the middle, the distribution moves to the middle amongst the kids who use social media for 4+ hours a day. Okay, so we just do a pool estimate by looking at what variable kind of matters for SDQ and the different dimensions, right? So conduct problems, emotional problems, hyperactivities, peer problems, and the total score is basically just these 4 added together. So we can see that in the most, it's quite evident if you look at the middle bit. So we're comparing to kids that are not using social media for less than 1 hour a day. You see that those that use 1 to 3 hours have a little bit more difficulties in conduct, emotional, and hyperactivity. And then we see those that use 4+ hours compared to those that use less than 1 hour per day have even more difficulties. And in peer problems, we see that it's not really an issue, which is kind of understandable, right? Like you're using social media, you feel like you have friends, you're connected with people. So that domain doesn't seem to be affected by social media usage. And we do an interaction term on the bottom here, and we see that for Blacks and Caribbean groups, the more usage is linked to even more conduct issues, but less emotional issues for them. But of course, we have a panel study, so I haven't really gotten there so much, but I thought I'd do a fixed effects just to see within person change, right? So we can see that looking at within person change across the waves, amongst the whites, once again, the darkest color is the most social media usage, right? It is linked to higher issues. So the higher the SDQ score, the strength and difficulty scores, means the more difficulties they're experiencing. For the other groups, it's not as clear. Other is like mixed race, Arab, all these other groups, they're not white, not completely white at least, and they're just kind of clumped together. But I think this is a sample size issue rather than a real lack of difference. Okay, so to go back to some of the naive questions we had, we know that parenting styles are indeed different, much like what we see in the US. African and Indian parents are less permissive, more authoritarian. Pakistani, Bangladeshi parents are less authoritative, African more. Gender differences are clearer among white parents than the other groups. We know social media usage goes up with age. I didn't really show much there, but it's controlled in the models. Usage is quite universal, so there's not a lot of kids that don't use social media at all. White and African adolescents use social media a little bit more than South Asians. And the relationship between social media usage and SDQ, we see that high usage is linked to hyperactivity, conduct problems a bit stronger for Africans, emotional issues weaker for Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and Africans. And the fixed effects show us that there's quite a clear pattern for whites where more usage is linked to more issues, but not for the others. Okay, so there is a laundry list of future actions. So we want to know whether or not parenting styles of ethnic minority parents actually mediate or maybe moderate the relationship between extensive social media usage and children's social and emotional health. So I didn't really go into it much before. We're looking at 4+ hours because there's a lot of sort of discussion on whether or not giving your child an iPad is bad, giving them an iPhone is bad. We see in most research, it's like the extreme cases that are bad, right? So it's not like if they touch an iPad, they're never going to go to college. It's more that if they use it a lot, it's quite irregular, right? So anything that's quite irregular, or when we look at SDQ scores, like if every child or every person has some difficulties or strength and difficulties, right? So it's not about like, oh, my child is not able to do this at 6 and Susie's child is able to do this at 6. It's more like when you're at the tail end, the highest distribution. So we might want to think about SDQ also more in terms of extreme scores in the next steps. Okay, so even though fixed effects is quite good in terms of looking at changes within person changes across time, it doesn't really rule out the possibility that if you have a child who is quite hyperactive, who has a lot of conduct issues, then you give them an iPad because they're really hard to take care of, right? So they're watching a lot of videos, they're doing things online because they're hyperactive, not because the watching is making them hyperactive. So even though fixed effects shows within person change, we might need something like a lag model to look at time to outcome when we are when we consider time one exposure. Okay, foreign native-born parents, I think just at preliminary check, there's not a lot of foreign-born parents in the sample either. So there's a lot of sort of second, third generation children in the sample. You might think about ethnicity a bit more. There's sample size concerned, but as an American, I also I didn't have very good understanding of the African population in the UK because somebody said, you're confounding Africans with Blacks, you know, because there's lots of white Africans in the UK, especially, right? But then so I need to find a way to sort of cross-check with other variables to see if we're looking at white Africans, Black Africans, or a mix. Gender differences is quite important to look at. So girls tend to report, first of all, internal mental health issues tend to be more prevalent amongst girls, and external tend to be more amongst boys. So we might want to look at these different dimensions. So that's all I have for today. Thank you very much. Okay.
What types of social media platforms?
Okay. Okay. Great, thank you. So the first question is, how do we form the ethnic groups, and what about why are, let's say, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Indians not together, and what about East Asians? And the second question is, what types of social media do the adolescents use? So for the second question, I don't have information on that, so they don't ask it. Yeah, they don't ask that. The first one is grouping. So I have spoken to different people, and actually it makes this type of talk really useful just to hear also people's opinion. So at first I grouped all Indians, Pakistani, and Bangladeshis together, and a colleague said, in the UK ethnicity research, Indians tend to be grouped separately from Pakistanis and Bangladeshis because they tend to do better, they are more educated, etc. They occupy sort of higher social economic rung of the ladder. But also another colleague told me that no, they could be grouped together because you're talking about parenting style. And parenting style wise, the South Asians are quite similar with each other. So I would ask you what do you think about that? What do you have any suggestions?
I think it all came generation.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So you mentioned that immigrant generations is probably quite an important thing to look at. That's something I need to explore a bit more. I think for the children, it's quite difficult, but we can try to do it for the parents. Yep, thank you. Okay, you.
Sorry, yeah, it's very interesting. I'm particularly wondering whether or not the what the information, if there is information on which kind of like we talk about social media, but like which device are we talking about, like an iPad, for instance. I think that's like amongst all the devices, phone, computer, iPad is probably like the most optional. So like, I can imagine people who live in like council estates, and such, they are not getting their information provided. Like, or if they had a high practice job, perhaps they don't have the funds to buy it. Perhaps it would be like, here's my phone, you can use this for a month. So yeah, I'm wondering about the device type, whether that's related to like MCS factors.
That's a really interesting point. I've never thought of iPad as being the most optional, but I guess it is, right? Okay, so the question is, do we know which device the child is using? I think there is one question, two questions. One is, do you have a phone? Second is, if you have a phone, is it a smartphone? But I don't know which device they use to sort of go on social media. But this idea that iPad is most optional. So if they have an iPad, does that signal more? Would you say that it signals more sort of like, is our parents' attitude towards maybe digital device usage more open, or what would that signal?
And maybe I think this actually is wrong, and I don't have it, but maybe it's no longer optional. But yeah, that at a certain level.
Okay.
Yeah, because like you went into study things like hyperactivity. Those are really different on to
Yeah.
I'm really curious if that information was there, because then you would be able to be like at the very end, you talked a little bit about, oh, maybe it's X not crossing line. X. It's like, oh, like maybe it's the type of device which is related to hyperactivity. Because people in moments have studied like certain, like if having a device this size or this size, does this influence how into children?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So whether or not the device different types of device would be more linked to some outcomes over others. I think there's so one of the things that a lot of or I think it's actually also in public discussion is, well, a lot of us millennials were raised by TV, like it's just our parents blast it all day. It's the best childcare tool. And we're fine. We're fine. It's always a tricky thing to argue because you don't know what the alternative you could be, right? So I think the issue, if you think there is an issue, is that a lot of devices, as you say, they're portable, right? So instead of watching 7 hours of TV at home, now your child needs an iPad when they're waiting in line. Now they need an iPhone when they're eating dinner, and you can bring that everywhere, right? And then the other issue is sort of more the algorithm, right? Suggesting videos and radicalizing. That's another sort of area of research. I'm not getting into that because I don't have information on that. So yeah, thank you for the comments. I think you pointed out many interesting aspects. I think you do.
I'm also very interested in parenting styles and child outcomes. So I'm wondering, what's your theoretical basis for your research? What kind of
Sorry, could you repeat it?
theoretical basis?
Uh-huh.
What kind of theories I use to interpret these?
So in terms of parenting literature, because this is a pretty new project for me, so I don't usually work with parenting or anything like that. So from what I've read in literature in ethnic parenting is this idea of like a deficit model, right? So like many parents of minority status, they feel like their children are not starting at the same sort of starting point as white children, let's say. So they, as a response, they parent in a more sort of highly demanding way in comparison. So beyond that, I am also really happy to hear if you have literature you'd like to share to help me enrich this study.
I don't think I have much to share. I'm first year PhD student.
Okay, don't want to put you on the spot, just in case, because it's like a seminar should also be a bit, back and forth. So feel free to also, if you think of something later and you want to email me, please do. Oh, he was, okay.
So you just mentioned that you don't have access to data on like any drawing. But I think it would be really interesting, especially as you mentioned that more recent platforms have like a different way of presenting data, and that maybe reduces the parental control over that. And I'm wondering, it'd be really interesting to see if the parental control features on specific platforms, if like parents who utilize those, if they're noticing that that changes the effect.
That's a really good idea. So I think sometimes, oh, sorry. Uh, the question was, would I have any information on the content that's being accessed and whether or not there's some sort of parental control that's installed on the phones or how that helps mitigate, let's say, some of the risks presented by device usage? I think that is a really great point. The issue usually with these type of studies is that they're designed sort of years in advance. And then, you know, and I think academics, we're also a bit more like dinosaurs. It takes us like a little, there's a lag time before we sort of catch up with the current trend of what's happening. So that's probably a good direction in the future. And another point that's probably worth making is that when you get a fellowship for 1 year and you're using a household survey to answer a really hot topic, you're not going to be able to take down sort of like some Stanford study with they have millions of dollars, tons of postdocs, and they're collecting their own data. They can design the survey there. So this is a very different type of strength that you would have in terms of a 1 year project using a household panel. So I think that your questions are very valid and they probably will be answered by somebody at some point. Realistically, probably we want to play up the strength of household surveys, which is we have family structures, we have data on the children's changes across time, and also sort of other relationship variables about their relationship with parents, for example.
And I answer my question. Looking at something where an algorithm should be happening. Yes.
Yeah.
So the other question I have is if you have information about parents.
So the question, okay. So the question is whether or not we have the parents' education in the survey. So we do, and they're controlled in the models. I think it probably, yeah, if it's not in the fine print on the bottom, then I forgot to put it there. So the age the child is born is controlled for in the parents' education. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Parenting would have a lot to do with it. Yeah, I'm sorry, education would have a lot to do with it.
One thing I put a question about theory. I think it's so exciting to be in the early stages of a project and putting all of it together. I was curious about, I was asking myself what kinds of assumptions was I making about parenting style and the usage of electronics.
Yeah.
I think there are some implicit things that were connections that we're making, but I think those are worth fleshing out. So like, what does it mean? What assumption am I making if somebody has an authoritarian or an authoritative style about how they might dictate, you know, the usage of devices?
Yeah.
I think that's where some of the theory questions can come in a bit.
Yeah.
And it might just be because I don't know the literature on parenting very much, so there's something there, but can you help connect those?
Yeah. Okay. So the question was on once again on theory behind some of the assumptions we're making here, which is that maybe if they're more authoritarian or permissive, we might give our child a device or not. So I think because it's still early stages of the project, so I have not gotten to the stage where I could say I know the literature inside out. So definitely that's something I need to think about. I can tell you what demographers' approach usually is with that type of sort of concerns, right? So you said, how do we know that because they're more authoritarian, they might be giving their child a device more or not?
Making some assumptions, right?
Yeah, so we can check like correlation, for example, we can look at association, whether or not when this score is higher, the child tends to be in the category of using social media for long hours. There's also a few other variables on gaming, for example. So we can also check TV watching, gaming, whether or not these seem to be consistent. But of course, in terms of theory, I still have to look into it further. So thank you for reminding me that that's a very important part of this research. Usually when you get lots of comments, it's like a really good talk or a really bad talk.
We might want to just collect questions to get to you.
Okay, okay. Mm. Yeah, thank you. So the question, oh, okay. Okay, should I repeat it now or later? Okay, I'm gonna try to write it down then. Okay.
So be very careful not to make any causal
Uh-huh.
implications. You got a data, presumably it's got measurements of so would you be able to make causal statements?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, yeah, and I can email you this too. Minutes of checking this before and printing the data, but I think you would really lean in, looking at your monitor list, really lean into the advantage you have with panel data, the hot perspective you have. My questions were about things you are thinking about. I don't know what your sample size is, it that much, but the differentiation of looking at child sex and gender, you might be attenuating some of your findings if you are looking at them differently, even though it sounds like they're kind of pushing out against how many ways you can cut it together. But that, and then I would be curious about just my own, if you do have enough variation in generational status of parents, with grandparents and minors, parents and minors. I know in some of the work that we had, we looking at like family eating behavior, like meals, child BMI, that there was a lot of variation in some of the other looking at status. But also my gender, so you might be pushing out the things that you're learning, but I'm gonna be looking at the data more so.
Okay, good. Should I? Okay. Okay. So there are three main questions. One is on parental mismatch in terms of parenting style. Second is, will I eventually be able to make a causal claim? Three, relatedly, whether or not we can see sort of different type of, let's say, growth trajectory across time, right? And if we can look at generational differences in terms of minorities. So first, parental mismatch. So what I showed was white dad and white mom differences, not the mom and the dad of the child. So it's looking at just the gender of the parents. So the next step would be to actually look at sort of the mismatch by individual child. So that's a great direction. Second, can I eventually make causal claims? I think because I'm not like an economist, I always try to tone down causal claims just because somebody's not going to like it, and then it's hard to publish when you say this is causal. But we're going to do our best, right, to sort of really play up the panel structure. Relatedly, something on sort of maybe something like growth trajectories that's different across groups, maybe a lot of usage affects one group differently across time than another. And then also generational differences. I think it'll be quite difficult with the sample size. We're already grouping them just so we can have a clear cross-sectional view. So when we look at it through waves, it might be challenging. But even if we're just looking, let's say, at Indians versus white, that could be enough if we have a good sample size and to do all these interesting things you suggested. Thank you.
And follow Julia and Chia down to 3 here at the moment.